It is so amazing that almost 8 centuries passed since the birth of Saint Prince Alexander Nevskiy, whose Remembrance Day is on the 6th of December, while the discussions concerning his personality are not over yet. In the history, there is no one opinion about the activity of Alexander Nevskiy, and the views of historians on his personality are different, being even sometimes controversial. For many centuries, Alexander has been considered to play a crucial role in the Russian history in the dramatic period when Rus was attacked from 3 sides. He has been identified as the father of Moscow princes, as well as the great protector of the Orthodox Church. At the same time, some modern historians, especially the Western ones, think that Alexander Nevsky played his negative role in the history of Russia, while his traditional image of genial military leader and patriot is highly exaggerated, as well as the danger from the West. They point out the situations when Alexander Nevsky is seen as a cruel man ambitious of power. According to the canonical point of view, Alexander Nevsky is considered as a saint and like a golden legend of the medieval Rus. Having not lost any battle for the whole life, Alexander showed his talent as both a military leader and a diplomat, having made peace with a stronger enemy, but at the same time more tolerant towards religion, the Golden Horde, repelling an attack from the west, defending the orthodoxy at the same time. This opinion of the authorities was official both before the revolution and even during the Soviet regime, being also supported by the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, let us contemplate who is eventually right. The 13th century is a horrific period in our history. It was the time when the nation could have perished, like many other nations had perished before. Rich, but separated into feuding principalities, the land of Rus was a tasty morsel both for the Golden Horde and the Crusaders who grabbed new territories, singing the anthems of the exaltation of Christianity at the same time. In the winter of 1237-1238, the armies of Batu Khan invaded Rus. Ryazan, Vladimir, Suzdal were plundered and burned, while the citizens were either killed or captured. The army of the Horde did not reach the town of Novgorod, where 16-year-old Alexander Yaroslavlevich, who would later be called Nevsky, was the ruler. Rus had not been defeated yet, but had already been severely weakened. That was the situation our Western enemies were interested in. In 1232, Pope Gregory IX called on Knights of the Livonian Order to take active measures against faithless Russians, while since 1237, after the Pope's order, anti-Russian coalition was formed. Later historian Igor Shoskolsky wrote, "It was the only time in history when the 3 powers of the Western European chivalry, the Swedish, the German and the Danish, united to invade the lands of Rus. Moreover, our lands and even the planned taxes that Rus would have paid had been set by Pope before. And who knew that 19-year-old Alexander Yaroslavlevich would become both daring and successful?" When in the summer of 1240 Swedish ships reached the river of Neva, Alexander did not linger anymore, and did not wait for the help of his father's armed forces. His courage and determination based on his faith that God is not in the strength, but in the verity, helped him to defeat the enemy whose army was more than 3 times bigger. 2 years later, his enemies understood that the reason of the military success of Alexander was not only in his courage, but also in accurate calculation. The story of Alexander Nevsky, who during the battle at the Chutskaya Lake entrapped knights to the shivery ice, is analyzed by all army leaders of the world. They analyze how this young military leader, being aware of the battle tactics of the Crusaders, managed to organize his army in the way that made the advantages of the knights their disadvantages. After the battle on the ice, Alexander Nevskiy made many non-trivial decisions that later occurred to be the only right. When people discuss the mistake of the civilized choice of the prince, they forget that it was the choice of two evils. Indeed, the Mongols, like a devastating wave, desolated the Russian lands, taking everything and everybody they could carry away. But were those civilized Europeans better? Here we have the words of French historian Jacques Le Goff about the Crusades. Instead of making the situation better, the Holy War in its apogee led the Crusaders to the worst excesses, beginning from Jewish massacres and ending with mass slaughter and looting. While spiritual orders of knights who appeared to be incapable to defend and save the Holy Lands settled in the West in order to turn to misusage of both military power and money. Byzantine chronicle Nikitas Choniates wrote, "The Saracens themselves are even kinder and more merciful in comparison with the people who wear the sign of Christ on their shoulder. Besides, they made the conquered brothers Christians deny the faith of their ancestors, while the representatives of the Horde had nothing against the gods of the conquered nations, as well as against the servants of these gods. Moreover, the churches were freed from any taxes to the Horde." Here we can be only amused with the far-sightedness of the prince, who managed to save the spiritual freedom of his nation, buying off with taxes. Alexander preferred to enslave his body, but not to corrupt his soul. The wisdom of the choice was proved by time. The blow on the might of the Horde would be struck by Dmitry of Don, the great-grandson of Alexander Nevskiy, while the Orthodox Byzantine that was invaded with the civilized Europeans would not rise up again. After 57 years of devastating ruling of the Crusaders, it would become an easy mark for the Ottomans. But was this obedience to the Horde his unconditional defeat? Historian Alexei Karpov wrote, "We can say about special Tatar policy of Alexander, the policy of pacification of the Tatars and unconditional obedience to them. His trips to the Horde were aimed on the prevention of new invasions to Rus. The prince tried both to pay huge taxes to the conquerors and prevent revolts against them on the lands of Rus." Historian Vladimir Pashuto thinks that with his cautious and watchful policy, the prince saved the lands of Rus from complete destruction, saving time and giving the opportunity to Rus to recover from devastation and to grow strong. People often say about the cruelty of the prince, but to understand his actions we need to know about the time he lived in and the situation he had to face. In 1257, the Horde wanted to take the census in order to estimate taxes more correctly. Due to many reasons, the attitude of our ancestors towards the census was full of mystical horror. The Horde did not enter the free town of Novgorod, where people resisted the census, and the revolt continued for a year. The son of Alexander, Vasily, was on the side of the rebels. Alexander Nevskiy clearly understood the character of the Mongols. The obedience to them should have been demonstrated, while any refractoriness would cause disproportionate cruelty. Therefore, the protest of the citizens of the town of Novgorod would destroy the delicate balance between the Horde and Rus. Due to this reason, Alexander took charges of the struggle against the rebels. The census was delayed after taxes were paid, but after the refusal to effect the will of the Horde, they had to pay with people. Alexander had to make a difficult decision, exiling his son Vasily to the town of Suzdal. While the instigators were punished, Alexander ordered to execute some of them, while others were either blinded or crippled. That was the demonstrative punishment of the few, in order to avoid the revenge of the Horde that would have aimed on all. In 1259, only private participation of Alexander prevented a new revolt, and the citizens of the town of Novgorod agreed to take census. The last trip of Alexander Nevskiy to the Horde lasted for almost a year and became a real triumph of his diplomacy. He persuaded Johann Berke not to recruit among the Russians, and he managed to redirect the intentions of the Khan. Alluding to the revolts of the Russians, Berke Khan stopped sending taxes to Mongolia, declaring the independence of the Golden Hood. That made it a defense of Rus from the east. The diplomatic actions, along with internal struggle for power, were the beginning of the decay of the Mongolian state. The last trip to the Hood for the 42-year-old Alexander Nevskiy was a real challenge. On the 14th of November 1263, he took monastic vows and in the evening of the same day passed away, until his almost breath remaining the true patriot of Rus, and the defender of the Orthodox faith, whose decisions defined the future well-being of the state.
Подвязающему